Hi. So I'm Ivy. I'm the director of the General Education Program. Yeah. And thank you for coming to the talk today. This workshop is mostly about how to write good course outlines for the Restructured General Education Program. So just to give you a little bit of the background, last academic year, we actually ran the old version of the GE program. So there's some changes made to the program, including the program aims, the program intended learning outcomes, and also the way we manage the program. So if you are interested in developing a new course for our program, this workshop would be extremely useful, I hope. So the flow of today's workshop, I will first talk about the restructured GE program. So I'll tell you what is the major changes to our program. And then I will talk about how we expect you to write the course outline for the GE program. Of course, it is also applicable to other course outlines for your own department, but for GE it's a little bit different or you can say it's a little bit more demanding because you have to also fit the general education purpose. And I'm also going to talk about the medium of instruction because for the general education program, we are trying to serve all students of our university. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the language policy a little bit. And then I'm going to share some of the common concerns from the reviewers, both internal and external reviewers that we have. Finally, two more points, the process of GE course development. So what are the procedures and what happened after you have submitted your proposal? And finally, I'm going to also call for new GE proposals for the next academic year. So these are the four areas. The only thing that we have introduced, the new area would be this digital trends and applications. So that is to align with the strategic plan of our university, where we put strong emphasis on digital competence. So we replaced Area D, which was interdisciplinary perspective, with digital trends and applications. And if you know a little bit about the general education program of other universities in Hong Kong, they have also introduced a new area, if not a core area, but on technology and data visualization and etc. And we adjust a little bit for area B from communication and literacy to communication and cultural literacy. Because in the past, when we use literacy, it actually involves all the digital courses. So now we actually have it separate here. And the original interdisciplinary perspective, if you think about it, all of the courses in the general education program involves an interdisciplinary perspective. So that is an overarching theme. We don't think that it is necessary to put it in an area in one of the core areas. So I think the most important thing is to highlight the ever-changing world that we're living in right now. So we want to keep the general education program timely, and we want to take this interdisciplinary approach not only in one area, but all of the areas, all four areas. And so these are the four areas. And I think the most important thing is to facilitate our students to make informed judgment, because every day they are just taking a lot of courses from their major, and we want to give them, the different options and different perspectives when evaluating the same topic. So both knowledge gaining from the major and also some of the additional knowledge that they gain from the general education program and applied them to making judgments. And the most important thing is to be lifelong learners, because even for instructors ourselves, we have to take different kinds of workshops to learn more. So I guess that is something that we have to tell our learners. They do not just stop here, not at the university level. So even after graduation, they should be learning. And I also revised the program intended learning outcomes. So here you can see there are four. So each of them is equivalent or they match one of those areas. So the first one is to apply the understanding of Chinese culture transformation and its relevance to the various aspects of modern life. So we emphasize Confucianism and the values of Confucianism in our university. But of course, we do not just go through classics in the courses. We want to tell students that how can you apply these teachings to your everyday life? And for example, how do you make use of these values to guide you how to make decisions at work and etc. And also how is that relevant to the modern life? And for area B, cultural literacy and communication, we hope that students could develop critical thinking. They should be able to express themselves. And I know we always talk about communication, but being eloquent is not the only thing. You need to be able to understand and address the different cultural needs. And I think that courses in this area would help learners achieve that. And the third one is global citizenship. And I think the definition of global citizenship has changed over the last 2 decades. And so if instructors are interested in developing courses for this area, you need to pay special attention because it kind of overlap with area B in a certain way because we have cultural communication. So it is actually relevant to global citizenship. So it depends on which area you are targeting at when you develop your course outline. So if you are targeting area C, or let's say if the general office is asking for proposal for area C, then you need to have stronger emphasis on this learning outcome, making positive impact through connecting between intellectual pursuits and their personal, social, and global responsibilities. And based on my review of all the courses available in areas C and B, I would say that when we do the categorization, we put strong emphasis on responsibilities as an individual, both personal responsibilities, social, and global. So that must be emphasized. And that would differentiate courses from this area, from B to C. And finally, the last one would be related to the broad-based knowledge and transferable core skills that are essential for both personal and professional development. So for GE, we care about personal development as well. So that I think it is important to understand that now we put strong emphasis on digital skills, but we would also want to incorporate or integrate that into their personal life, and they would find that it's useful. So they do not find a disconnection between what they learn on campus versus what they need to use outside or in a society. So because of for some reason, I moved the slide to this. So I'll just cover this first, the medium of instruction. So a lot of instructors would send in proposals and they would decide which language to use. And sometimes it's more of a convenience choice. So they said, well, let's say I can speak Cantonese and I just find it easier to build rapport with my students by using Cantonese. So I would put the medium of instruction as Cantonese. And let's say I do have 2 or 3 topics on Chinese culture in my, for example, in my cultural class. But we have to understand that we need to, when we decide the choice of the language of instruction, we have to think about the following factors. So it's the publication and the subjects concerned, right? So the publications, if they are mostly in English, it would make sense to use English as the medium of instruction. So the learning materials, the teaching materials that you use, right? And of course, we also looked at how specific that is to the culture. So for example, in area A, there are a lot of courses that are conducted in Chinese, but because there's a need to do so, the classics, the readings, and etc. Okay, so we would highlight those courses for students. Now, it is also the requirements for professional qualifications, so all of these are concerned. And finally, I think this is very important, is the optimal teaching and learning effectiveness. And for this, it's not just one particular group of students. if we think about it, the general education program is for all students of Xuyan. So it involves Cantonese speakers, Mandarin speakers, non-Chinese speaking learners, because the school is now recruiting more students from these communities, and we have to pay particular attention to that. And I think this is very important because as instructor myself, when I teach English writing, sometimes I would want to switch to Cantonese to kind of explain the concept a little bit. But now, if I do that, I'm basically assuming that my Mandarin students understood what I just said. But that's not fair because I can't make that kind of assumption. So I think that is very important to understand the needs of the group of students that you have. So when you do the course outline, and sometimes GE office would say that please try to use English as the medium of instruction, do not put both. I understand that it's kind of difficult sometimes when you want to explain certain concepts, but we want most students to be able to choose the courses. Otherwise, those students, let's say Mandarin speakers and non-Chinese speaking learners, they would have less choices to pick from the general education program. So we want to try to avoid that. Okay, so now I want to talk about the course aim. So the writing of the course aim first. So this is an example that I picked from one of the areas, one of the courses that we have. And if you take a look at this original one, it's about 250 words. Now for course aim, writing course aim is quite tricky. Usually this is a bit too long. I would suggest 100 word would already be sufficient. And if you look at this, you don't have to read it, but this whole big chunk of words, it's only the background. So we have to also be realistic. When students are trying to pick courses, they're not going to go through these in detail. But I understand that the teacher wants to explain all these concepts so that, they know what is westernization, and why it is important to talk about these 3 Chinese cities. Now, but this is really a bit too long. Students are rather pragmatic. They want to know what they can get from this course. They want to know is the topic interesting, right? And some of the students are even more practical. They want to know if they can get a good grade. Okay, so I think that it's important to give them a little bit of the background information. But the most important thing would be here. This second part is actually quite important because it talks about how this course what kind of approach would it take. And it also highlights that these 3 cities are coastal cities. So I think that is also important, right? Because that is some sort of an implication why we pick these, a lot of activities happening in these cities. And so there are 3 themes, 1, 2, and 3. So I think that this type of structure is quite good. Learners can immediately read it. But it's still a little bit too wordy. So I tried to revise it and cut it down to 160 words. And if you look at this, the background is about 2 sentences. I think that would be the goal. 1 or 2 sentences on the background. Try to hold it, keep the best part to the course. And in the course outline, you just give me the gist of what we can get from it. And of course, when you do that, you also have to pay attention to the wording because it has to be accessible to the general public, I would say. Okay, so that's the most important thing. Because if you think about the general education program, we want to eventually be able to offer these courses not only to the elderly academy, but also in the future, these could be offered to general public like some other universities are doing. So let's say if anyone who walk past the university and you give the course aim, they should be able to understand that. And then I try to rearrange the information a little bit, trying to make it easier for students to understand. So this is about 160 words, but like I said, it would be best if you could keep it under 150. I think that would already be sufficient to talk about the major topics, right? And just to provide an overview of the course content. So after you write it, you have to see if it echoes back to our program aims and the respective ILOs, which is the area intended learning outcomes. So if you're writing for area B, you can just simply go back to area B. And we do have the GE checklist for your information. So we prepare that for instructors. Now, one thing I would like to remind you, as someone who had done this many times, try to write it in a way that gives you some flexibility in the course aims. Why is that? Because if you change the course aims, you have to go through QAC, and that would be months. And you might be invited to answer the question during the QAC meeting. So that's why, if you don't want to do that, you want to make sure that you keep the aim very brief, understandable, but not too specific. So it's a very tricky thing. But it would be good if you do that. Because let's say, I just want to give you an example. If you use one of the silos or teaching learning activities and put it in your course aims, let's say you say that there would be field trips. And then later you decided, I don't want to do field trips this year, but it's in your course aim. Now then, you'll be in trouble because you cannot change the course aims. So that's why I want to remind you that do not use silos, teaching learning activities, and AT, and put that in your course aims. That wouldn't be a good idea. And one of the course outlines in the past we had was, this course will be co-taught by 2 instructors. And we got the question from QAC. You put that in the course aim, and now you want to change it to 1 instructor. And then we said, yeah, that's basically what we thought. And they said, well, you put it in the course aim. And then we said, can we remove it? Okay, so I will tell you later. The procedure is actually, it involves a lot of people. So that's why I said keep it to 150 words, because the more you write, the more restrictions you're giving to yourself. Okay, we don't give you the restrictions. So actually, by asking you to write less, I'm trying to give you more flexibility in a sense. Okay, and I think that a lot of instructors actually mixed up and would think that, okay, so why don't I just put some silos in the aims, because that's what I'm aiming to do. I also have that same question. So try to remind yourself that, no, I'm actually just going to touch upon, the course content, the most interesting thing. Okay, I just have 10 seconds to grab the attention of the students and want them to pick my course. Now, the competition is actually quite keen for a GE course, because many students are looking at, all these courses available in each area, and they're picking it. So you're fighting over, different clients. So you want to make it very interesting. So just give them the most key topics, the buzzwords if you want, and try not to put silos, TLAs, and ATs in the course aim. So what about silos? Now, this is something that I actually don't really like to write, because it's very difficult. I've never attended a workshop on writing course outline before I did one. So when I got the comments, I was very furious, because I don't understand why I can't use those words. And then later I found out why not. And I'm still learning today how to write these. So the first question you have to ask is, do they communicate what students are expected to achieve by taking the course? Okay, what do you want them to know or be able to achieve by the end? Not only what they want to know, because know is not a good word for silos. So what can they achieve? And number 2, I talked to a few colleagues. Are they measurable? It has to be measurable and observable. So you cannot observe whether someone understands something or they know something, but you can observe when they are able to identify something. Because if you identify, you have to, let's say, highlight the things out. And if you highlight all these key points correctly, you are able to identify. But even if I nod my head when I tell you that I know what are silos, I might not know, right? So they have to be measurable, and they have to be observable. So now, writing good silos would would be important because it is connected to your ATs, which is the assessment test, because you're going to assess students against them later. So when the reviewers look at what you wrote, they would look at your silos and then they look at the ATs and think, are these ATs going to be able to measure what you want to measure in your silos? So this example here, students will be able to understand, master the language processing mechanisms. Okay, so no, that's not good. Student will be able to identify the language processing mechanisms. Now, I know that it's a little bit playing with words, but again, what is important is whether you can measure measure it. Okay, and if you are not a person that loves words, or you don't want to play with words, you just find that it's crazy and annoying, then there's a fast method, which is the OPTL handbook. This is from the Bloom taxonomy. Actually, I can also share the slide with you. Actually, if you click onto this, it will bring you to the link on using action verbs. Now, as a linguist myself, I think that a lot of the words there are actually the ones that they don't identify as action verbs. I find them pretty okay. So I think it's a little bit confusing. But anyways, that's not the key thing I want to talk about. The most important thing here is if you want to check the comprehension of your students, then you can use these words like explain, interpret, give, example, select, restate, identify, recognize. Okay? And just treat them as synonyms and use them. Okay? If you don't want to think of a word, and even if you use ChatGPT, it might not be able to help you. It might give you another word that is not in the taxonomy. So I would suggest that you go to the OBTL handbook, which is available on QAC's website. And I usually would also send that when I call for proposal. So let's say if you want to know their knowledge, then here are some of the other words like define, identify, list out, recall, or just name something as students do, or label. So these are the words, okay? So there are the different domains in the middle, and see what do you want to measure for the students, and then you can basically use the words here. It would already be sufficient, okay? And no one in QAC would challenge you if you use the words from this circle, this wheel. Okay, so for the teaching and learning activities for GE, I put the word for GE because GE is different from major courses. Fun is key. That's the most important thing. Okay, but unfortunately, what I see right now, some of the current courses, the ones from some maybe already developed years ago, it's always term paper, group presentation, class discussion, quiz, test. But I really hope that for our new courses, fun will be the key here. I think that it's very important you understand that when you're teaching these students, they just need to have fun. They need to have fun, they need to learn, but in a fun way. So we focus more on experiential learning and service learning. So let's say they have to do volunteer service. It would be a good match to global citizenship. What is better than to take them out to visit an elderly home or to do a one-day volunteer work than to sit here and listen to, as a responsible citizen, you should do blah, blah, blah. Why don't you just take them out, right? Because in a lot of different charities or organizations, they're looking for helpers. They're looking for volunteers. And if we could send our students to help a day or two in, like dog rescue or, visit elderly home, that would already be a good way for them to learn. And it's fun. And we also have experiential learning. So we have an integrated summer course where students can go on an exchange. But before that, they would take some courses to improve their intercultural competence before they go out. Now, so it's not the same as just going out. They know they need to be able to achieve something. They need to come back with something, and they have to offer something to that city that they are traveling to. Now, so that is very important. I think this is really one of the major motivation that I would want to have this workshop, is to reassure instructors that fun is key in the general education program. We do encourage instructors to have field trips, relevant field trips. Now, then of course you ask, okay, if I arrange a field trip, I don't have money. I have to pay out of my own pocket. Okay, so I actually asked for the GE office, because we are not a department, but the university is very generous to offer reimbursements, could be made on a case by case basis. And I will, of course, for the instructor's expense, it will be covered once that field trip is approved. The instructor's expense, let's say if you take students to a museum, and for the tickets, it will be included. You can get your money back, but students have to pay for their own trips. Okay, so the university is not going to pay for 60 students. Okay, but the instructor's cost will be included, and the reimbursements would be made based on the case. And of course, please do let us know in advance if you have that plan in mind before the semesters begin. So this year we have courses. Instructors are taking students to M+ Museum, and also taking them to some art fair. Okay, so we really encourage that. And teaching and learning activities. Now, a lot of instructors, when they first join Xuyan, what they do is they look at some samples prepared by previous colleagues when they design their course outline. So in the end, it will be all same TLA. You try not to revise them, because you don't want to get comments that these are not good. You should go back to that. But again, I would encourage you to be a bit more creative. I think GE would be a place where creativity is allowed. Okay, and if any case, you can quote me, and I will do my best to fight for a fun course. So I think for the teaching and learning activities, I actually see lectures and class discussions as TLAs. Well, they are teaching and learning activities, but something is missing. I guess it's the fun part, because you're going to have lectures and discussions anyways. So I think we could also try to do some sort of games, games that we know, like Pictionary, board games, and bingo. And you can easily switch that for your course, or just do a little bit of an adjustment. And once you do that, maybe at the beginning it's quite time consuming to do it, but if you teach that course over the years, students would love it, and it would be easier on your side as well, because they can do some activities. And of course, there are a lot of different games. And I think that games would be a good way to learn, and they don't feel that it's all about writing papers. And there are also role plays. So in GE, you can use lightning pitches. So for example, students are only given 30 seconds. Now that's a good thing. You keep it short, so you don't have to listen to long presentations. Sometimes when well-prepared students will give you very good lightning pitches. Students who are not prepared would only be given 30 seconds too, so you don't have to sit through a very boring presentation. So that's the good thing about using role play. And besides, in the real scenario, how much time are you given to pitch your work, right? Even if we talk about our grand interviews, they only give you 10 minutes, and you only have a very, very short span of time to grab their attention. So I think that, for example, like debate, we also have teachers who also introduce that debate. I think that is pretty cool, because in debate, you are given different kinds of roles. Okay, so you can try to step into the shoe of another person when you're discussing this, right? Let's say if we talk about global citizenship, then I can be someone from the Chinese culture. But let's say I had studied abroad for 5 years. So my perspective might be a little bit different from a student who never been abroad. But even if I'm given the role to think that, oh, I've never been out ever before, then I need to step into the shoe of that person when I do my discussion. So I think that role playing is quite good. And you can also have panel discussions, right? And students do the discussions in a way that you don't just ask them to discuss, but you give them a role, you give them some task. Okay, and finally, the peer review. I know that this one is quite controversial. In English writing, we ask students to do peer review, and students always come back and say, his or her English is worse than mine. How dare the student comment on my English? And I also don't trust the review. I'm going to wait for Ivy's. And that's why I told students, don't correct the grammar, correct the ideas. I think that is something that all of us have the ability to do so. So 2 weeks ago, I actually gave a workshop on ChatGPT and English writing. So one thing that it proves to us is that grammar, I'm not saying that grammar is not important, but it's not the most important thing, because ChatGPT now help us produce error-free writing. But it's still bad. So what does that imply? You don't need to have perfect grammar to be a peer reviewer, but you need to have knowledge, right, for that topic. So I think through learning from the instructors, the students would eventually learn to focus on these key points and be able to make good review. Now, if they are not going to be assessed, then it could be a teaching and learning activity. Just do it in class and make them do it. You don't have to give them 10% or 20%. Let them understand that this is one of the activity that you have to do in class. Of course, I know our students as well. They only do things that counts. Well, but you try to, integrate them into class activity, force them to do it before they can move to the next slide. Find some ways to do different teaching and learning activities in GE. Now, but it's also very important to separate the TLAs from ATs. They are different things. Okay, so the assessment tasks are the key thing that our reviewers would look at, QAC would look at. That's the most important thing, because it's connected to all the TLAs and all the silos. So these, if you put it in TLA, make sure that they are not ATs. Okay, ATs are ATs, TLAs are TLAs. So for now, it comes to assessment tasks, very important. And I think all of these things that I put it in my PPT today is from my perspective as an instructor, from my perspective as the administrative person in the GE office, and also some other admin work that I've done before. So I want to draw instructors' attention to that, because I know that it is very frustrating, because sometimes we do not communicate the expectations of QAC or reviewers to instructors. We just ask them to, hey, can you create a fun course? Okay, I created a fun course, I sent it to you, and then you come up with all these questions. It seems like you're punishing me. So I want to give you a bit more support. The first thing is, when you do the assessment task or decide what to use, the first thing is to review the silos again. Are all my ATs relevant to my silos? If I have 4 silos, have I use my ATs to measure against them? Because we do have reviewers saying that, how are you going to measure 2 and 4? I don't see any ATs that are relevant to silo 2 and 4. Now, reviewers would pay attention to that. They always look at that 2 things. Okay. So if you want to avoid having too many comments from the reviewers, you need to know what they're looking at. Okay. So one thing I think instructors, they don't know what are you commenting on. So sometimes it's just miscommunication, I would say. So make sure you select ATs that assess against the silos. You cover all of them. Okay. Now, and the third thing is also a very common comment that we get. You have to make sure that the course will provide enough support for completing each AT. Now, I got this myself, actually. I said that I want students to create a little language tutor in week 7 and try it out as an experiment. Then the reviewer said, in the first 6 weeks, first 5 weeks, you didn't mention anything on how to build this software or this tutor. Then how do you expect them to be able to do it in week 8? So you need to have that planning in mind. If you want them to do something, you cannot assume that they would learn it, self-learn it, because you put it in the AT. Okay? So if you put it in the AT, make sure in your course content, you show a natural progression that you are helping them to eventually achieve that in week 8. So what I did was I changed 3 tutorials 3 weeks before I asked them to build the tutor and give them training for 45 minutes each week for 3 weeks. So by week 4, they would be able to do it. Okay? So otherwise, it would be very chaotic. Okay? For that year, I remember students would come to me. There are a lot of consultation sessions because they didn't know how to build it themselves. They have a lot of questions, and that's my bad. And I learn. And I think after I provide the workshop, actually, it's easier for me as well. And it would also affect your evaluation because when students start to get confused, it will be reflected in your evaluation. And I do go through the evaluation when I decide what kind of courses to offer in the next semester. Of course, I want students to be happy. It has to be a fun course, right? We want to offer things that are interesting to them. So make sure when you ask them to build a program, build a prototype, you have equipped them with enough knowledge and skill to complete that. I think this was also one question asked by QAC for the integrated summer program where they want to ask students to make a video. Then some members said, so are you going to train them on video editing skills? Then the instructor said, no, we're not going to do that because now in the digital era, everyone can use it. Is it true that everyone can edit the video in a professional way? Maybe students from JMC would be better at that. Now, in that case, they would show obviously a substantial amount of advantage when making video. So how do we mitigate that? One thing to do is to emphasize in the rubric that you're going to focus on the content. And video editing skills would be treated like grammar, 5% or 10%. Okay. And what would be even better in the future, hopefully, with the collaboration with the Teaching and Learning Development Office, we want to provide online support for students to learn how to make video and do all that. So hopefully they would have that general digital skills. By providing them with that kind of support, hopefully you can also, have more flexibility and creativity in the ATs that you set. Okay, once students have better skills. Because now we don't expect students to not know how to make a PPT, right? So it takes time to really internalize that knowledge without having to teach them how to make a PPT. Because now when we say that make a PPT for the group presentation, QAC members won't ask, have you taught them how to use Microsoft PowerPoint? No, we haven't, but they know how to do it because that's what everybody knows. Okay, number 4 is from one of the committees. So one of our senior management member reminded me that let's keep our ATs to a maximum of 4 because students are overwhelmed. Okay, honestly, they are, if not more, equally overwhelmed like us because it's scary. If you have 5 courses, if you have to take 4 credits, 4 courses or 4 to 5 in one semester, and all the instructors have the term paper in the end, week 13, week 14, all of them are due in that week. Imagine that, right? And for us, and because of COVID, there's no exam. So they have to turn it into 2 assignments. And at one point, there are 6 assignments for one course. And you have to multiply that, right? So it grows exponentially. And so keep it to a maximum of 4. Now, when I first got that comment, I thought, that's great. Because, in the past GE program, one of the directors or the committee members said that for all GE courses, you need to have 5 ATs minimum. So when I say that, okay, thank you all for your support. So I'm the new director. Now it's 4. And then some instructors were mad and say that, so what do the GE office want, 4 or 5? And actually GE office only listen to what the upper management say, right? So now we want to give it back to 4. Okay, I realize that there's one problem because it's 100%. When you cut it down to 4, it also creates a problem. Then how do I, distribute the percentage? That is the one hard thing too. I have to keep it to a less amount. But at the same time, members from the QAC would say that this is too heavy weighting. Put it somewhere else. Okay, so I have to make sure that it's 4, but I have to put the percentage somewhere else. So where? So there are a lot of interesting questions. So I think one thing is to break them down, a little bit, and turning one substantial AT into smaller parts. So eventually, I first do, let's say, because you're all scholars, so I can say this, you first do a lit review, and then you do annotated bibliography. So you slowly add up to that final project. It's actually not separate ATs, but helping students to build upon the previous work that they have done. Now, students will thank you. You will thank yourself. Okay. Otherwise, you have to read a lot of different things, different topics. It's very exhausting. So I think that keeping it to 4, it's good, but it's also the challenge of fixing the percentage. Now, also try not to have one AT where you have 20 case studies. That is not changing it into 4. I have one instructor who said 8 quizzes throughout the semester. 8 quizzes, but that's one AT. And I said, no, that's a torture. So when I review the courses, and I'm not a very good student, so I'm not the hardworking one. So if I see 8 ATs, I think that's too much. Okay, so even if the instructor would make use of the digital platform like Moodle to do the grading, I still don't think that 8 quizzes is a good idea. And each quiz, how many percent? 3. Imagine that. You are going to get very bad evaluation. So I'm actually saving you from getting bad evaluation by asking you not to do that. And also there will be a lot of deadlines. So when we say 4, really try to keep it to 4, not a lot of them embedded into 1. Finally, it's to avoid cramming all the final term papers submission to week 14 and 15. And this is very interesting. One instructor said, sure, then 16. Okay. The point is, I really like Dr. Yang's one of the comments to one of those course outlines. You can try to make them do another paper earlier, right? After you have taken like 4 to 5 weeks, you should have the ability to write something substantial too. You don't have to keep the most substantial thing to the end. So that is something to think about, right? Because when students, so what is another problem with this when you do that? Then you will be given the grade submission deadline. So if the students are late, you will submit your grade late. And then the office will come to you. Hey, it's not within the range. You have to fix it. So everyone is mad. The student is mad. You are mad. Registry is mad. Nobody's happy when everything is, cramped in the very last week. And then during the board of examination meeting, and then you have to explain that this student got an F because the student haven't finished the assignment. So are you going to give them 2 more days? And then they will ask you a lot of questions. So the way to avoid this is try to spread out, the work a little bit. For GE, it's important to pay attention to the group size and presentation duration. This is one thing that instructors might miss, especially for new colleagues, because GE usually has quite a large class size. Not 20, 25, but 30 to 38. one section. So then sometimes instructors set 3 to 4 students in a group, 30-minute presentation. That would be how many weeks of presentation? Okay, maybe you don't have to teach, but sitting through 3 weeks of presentation would be a bigger torture than talking for 9 hours. So I think you have to also make that kind of calculation in your head. Is it really a good idea to make students in the GE course to do presentations? You know, and another thing that would be extremely annoying if you have a big class and do presentation. You have 6 students. You can pump up the size. Let's say 7 students in a group, and you do presentations for 30 minutes. So each student will talk for 2 minutes. Some will talk for 1, and then you have a few free riders there, and then you have to manage all the complaints. And you can't even evaluate them, because if that person only speaks for 30 seconds, right? How can you evaluate them? What about the individual assessment? Then another thing is you have to look at the attendance sheet, and then you have to match the face. And then there are 7 of them in 30 minutes. That's a torture. All these are very hard lesson learned myself. So remember to pay attention to that and see if it's practical to do that for GE because of the class size. Okay. So there could be other ways to assess them apart from doing group presentations. Try to think of ways to make your life easier. Yeah, I think that's really important. Now, so for number 7, use a diverse variety of tasks. My dream is to hopefully come up with different samples of tasks that instructors could pick from. I don't want you to do all the work. I know that asking you to make it fun. Now, you might be, yeah, it's all fun when you listen to what I say right now, but to actually do it, it's hard. It's easier to do something that's like fill in the blanks, do some MCs, do some discussions. Those are very easy, no fuss. But we want to give them a diverse variety of tasks. And here, when we give them these tasks, of course, we are not going to ask them to do things that are not relevant to their everyday life, because it is general education. We want to be practical. So I think authenticity is the key. How relevant it is to their daily life. So for example, you can ask them to write critique, short reviews, or synopsis, summarize things, right? That would already be very nice. Annotated bibliography, where they do their reading and write 30 to 40 words of summary and say, why is this relevant to helping you do your lit review? Give them some case studies, portfolio making, survey, report. Now, actually, these are nothing new. But sometimes when we look at samples, when you see the samples, you kind of set your mind and want to stick to those samples. But occasionally, changing the ATs would actually make your life easier. That's how I felt. And I hope that this could help. Now, for short reviews, I actually have an assessment task. I asked students to write only 400 words. I had 80 students, 400 words. Much easier for me to grade. Yeah. And you know what? Students would find it very challenging to just write 400 words. Yeah. But that's the point. I just want you to talk about the key things. And I don't need you to write, 400 words of introduction before you tell me what you want to say, right? So the real life scenario is things are very short. We are always asked to keep things short and simple. So we should also do that for these tasks, right? So hopefully these things would reflect what they have to do in the future. Sometimes students comment that these English writing courses, they are not relevant to my major. I'm not going to write in English, or I'm not going to write a narrative paper when I graduate. So I'm not going to do it well, or I'm just going to copy and paste something. So now we're also trying to tweak the course so that it's more practical. We ask them to sit together and let's pretend that there's a job interview, like things like that. Or do some minutes, or do some presentation like what I'm doing right now, or hold a workshop. Then it can benefit the student, benefit the students, the audience as well. So I think number 8, make good use of technology to reduce your grading load. I actually attended a talk by this professor who spent his life talking about assessment. He said that we spend a lot of the time grading. Asian teachers spend a lot of hours, I think over 9 hours per week or something on grading. And you know the saddest part? We all know, it's recorded, right? We all know students don't really pay attention to the comments that we make sometimes. They look at the grade. There are the comments, there's the grade. If I don't get a good grade, I appeal. I didn't attend class, but I appealed because I didn't get a good grade. Okay, but you spend hours doing that. I'm also a passionate teacher. I'm happy when students really read my feedback. I feel that it's very rewarding. But I also know that not all students do that. So we have to strike a balance, right? If we always spend most of our time grading, then what about research, right? What about other things? So I think some of the tasks could be given to technology. Actually, Moodle has some features where it would help you do some basic grading, and you can give them MC questions, short questions, and all that. Some of my colleagues would use that, and I try to learn it, and it's time consuming, again, at the beginning, but it would be great later. Okay, so if there are good resources, good platform, I would try to share it through the GE website as well. And finally, I think I still have a couple of points. This one, to review the assessment weighting. Always do that when you do your AT, because there something that you have to pay attention to. The first thing is presentations. When you evaluate students for group presentations, which part is group? Which part is individual assessment? That's very important. One of our colleagues in the board of exam meeting said, the students all got similar score because group presentation, I give the same score because it's group work. But I actually have a question. Individually, we present in a different way. You know, the delivery of content material should be different. Unfortunately, the rubric is a group assessment rubric. So everyone got the same score. Now, that would be a problem because in a course, and when we assess our students, we want to be able to differentiate students, right? Good, average, But if your assessment test cannot do that, then you would run into trouble when you grade them. And then you come to me and say that I cannot fit into that recommended range. No, that's because you didn't think of that beforehand, which you should think about that beforehand. Is this assessment, can I differentiate students, the different kinds of students, using this assessment task, the rubric in this assessment task? So the rubric is also important. The group weight, the individual weight. Okay. And also it will help you avoid or address some issues such as free riders. Students at the end of the term would come to you and say that person, Ivy didn't do anything, but she's going to get an A too because I did all the work. Now, when you have this type of trouble, and if your rubric said it's group work, then it would be a problem. Okay, so here, another thing is the quizzes. Some instructors said that quizzes 30%, 2 hours. Now, I think in Xuyan, exams are usually 2 hours, 40%. And a lot of reviewers would think, you ask students to do a quiz and it's 2 hours and 20%. They would think that it's a bit problematic. So the weighting and the level of difficulties, you have to pay attention to that. So it would be best to, I think, a maximum of 60 minutes if it's a quiz. So it shouldn't be like 2 hour long. And for final exam, if you go to the OPTL handbook, it has to be 40%. Okay. It has to be 40% and a minimum of 2 hours. You can give them more time. Now, finally, almost, assessment rubrics. Now, for GE, I observed that the holistic rubric is a company adopted one. So this one, it's quite brief. And this one is called the analytic rubric, which you can see that the format is a little bit different. You can talk about the weighting here. You can weight the different criteria, and then you have all these ranking. I don't know which one you prefer. So this one is actually company adopted in the English department, and this one is ICGE. They all use that. What's good and bad? This one is great for instructor because you just have a rough idea how to, after you review the assessment, you have a rough score. Now, but for this one, it's very specific. My previous department head said that, is this even realistic? You have 30% here, 30% there, and sometimes 25%. Are you really doing that? Now, some students might like this because it's very clear. But this is also good. But you just have to make sure that it's good for that task and for your course. You can use whichever, but you have to make sure that you cover all the things you want to assess. Okay. Now, because sometimes the problem with holistic rubric, it's so holistic that you only have a rough idea of the grade that the student would get. Then you might run into trouble when you look at this mark range because you only have a brief evaluation, then you might exceed. Now, so in this case, I highly encourage you to, when you are designing your assessment test, you have to make sure that students are able, you can differentiate students from the different assessment tasks, and also pay attention to that recommended range and see if you can differentiate the better students from the students who are average. Okay? Because all these thinking, if you design your course well, you run into less trouble, both for grading and to deal with all the other administrative duties. Okay, and for the GE office, we are not that rigid and say that, oh, this is 57%. We are not going to allow it. Okay, we understand that sometimes it happens. Some students are better, some sections are better, but we want you to have a sense and bear that in mind. We try to keep it within the recommended range. Okay, and this is from our external reviewer. Please make sure you include proper referencing format and style as one of the grading criteria for the relevant ATs. For example, if it's just a debate, of course, proper referencing is not relevant there, but written work, we found that in some of the GE courses, if you plagiarize, you are not going to be penalized according to the rubric. But that's not okay, right? So make sure that this is in all the written assessment and all those that require students to do citation or to make reference, they need referencing materials, then you need to have this in your grading criteria, even if you use the holistic one. Okay, so basically these are the things that our reviewers would want to know, and the concerns, the comments that I have repeatedly get. Level of difficulties. Why is your GE course so difficult? They are non-majors. Why is it so demanding? That is one of the things. I get comment as the director and say that instructor coming to me, who are you to comment on my expertise? Then I said, none of the GE directors in the world can comment then, because general education is for the general public. Anybody should be able to comment. I don't have to be an expert to know whether I could understand this. So if you want to wait until an expert, then bring that course back to your department. If you want to go through GE, it better be understood by general public. Okay, so you might see me printing out all the new course outline and going on the street in Burma Hill and asking people for comments. But try to keep the level of difficulty to, don't have that expectations that you have for your major. Okay, and of course the length, that is the thing that I've been talking about in the last hour. Now, this one is very interesting. Recency of readings. They love to comment on that. This is 1994. Do you have a more up-to-date version? Okay, they like to get this type of comment. Now, some instructors would say that, but this is classic. This is great. Now, okay, indicate that in the course outline with an asterisk. Okay, but of course, then when I ask some of the instructors, this reading looks, it's not peer reviewed. Then some instructors would say that, well, it's a GE course, so I want to give them more accessible, materials that they understand. Okay, I understand that. But can we have a balance? Okay. After all, it is a credit-bearing course. It is an academic course. So the reading should be a good one, well written, at least peer reviewed, if you are using journal articles. Okay. With some downloads, maybe, not zero. So I would also look at that for fun. But our reviewers would also look at that. And also the length. Sometimes we get 60 pages per week. I already know that I'm not going to read it. Then students definitely won't. Okay, so 60 is too much. Number of ATs that I already talked about. Now this one, word length, writing. Some of the assessment has 3,000 words, 4,000 words, and it's a lot. Writing more doesn't mean that they would show that they learn more. So we have to adjust our thinking. So I want you to really pay attention to that, and also the ATs and TLA varieties, because again, try not to have that overlap. ATs are not TLAs. Try to separate the two. Okay. And finally, I just want to show you that this is the process of the GE course development. Why do I have to show you that? Because when we set the deadline, when you find that it's ridiculous, then I want to let you know that this is the deadline that we have. We must meet this deadline. So usually, sometimes I'm forgetful, but we call for proposal in October, let's say, and then you submit the proposal. So this one is a very brief one. And we'll do a quick internal review of the topic, whether it's relevant to what we need. And then we will select the courses that we think, well, it's good. Then once we find that it's appropriate, then we'll ask the instructors to develop a course outline. Now, sometimes course instructor would think that, wow, okay, so I have a new course now. No, you don't. We have to look at the course outline. Like, come on, if you write a proposal that is very brief, okay, that is not enough, So we need to look at the details. But the first step, it's that you can develop a course outline. So once you have done that, we would look at the fully fledged outline, and then we'll give comments. Internally, we do have a GE task force where they do give us comments. And both Ika and I, we would also look at them, okay, based on our needs, the program, the restructured program, as well as our experience in reading all these comments from the previous reviewers. We would invite instructors to do their first revision. So it would happen, the revision would happen in December and January. That's around that time. And then we'll send it to external reviewer. External reviewer include our external program assessor. He or she is very detail-oriented, okay? And then once we have done that, we have to ask our instructors to do second revision. And after the second revision that has been completed, then we'll give it to QAC for the third internal review. So QAC will take into account, so in QAC's mind, you have already done the internal review, address all the comments. Then you have addressed all the comments from the external review. And that is when QAC members would look at it the third time to make sure that this is good enough. And then they would give comments. And then there comes the third review. And basically 2 days later, we have to we have submitted a few this time, 4 of the new courses to QAC for their review. So actually, each of the review, it will take 3 weeks. We need to give our program assessor enough time. So of course, sometimes we understand that we all have very busy schedule, but I just want to make you understand that when we do have, let's say, 5 new course outlines, we need to gather all of them before we send it out. We cannot have 2 instructors giving in and I'll just throw it to our external. We have to wait until all of them are ready and send it in a full set. So if anyone is late, the process will be delayed. And then we cannot submit it to QAC on time. And then it will affect the whole process. So we try to stick to this deadline and want instructors to understand that these deadline, the deadline that we set are to make sure that things run smoothly. Okay, they are not just random deadlines because I need to take a vacation. That's why I said it earlier. Anyways, so final word is the future directions of the general education program. We hope to promote digital competence. We understand that it's a need for the instructors to use more variety of ATs, and we are happy to help students to promote the digital competence. We will also provide support for learning outside the classroom, including field trips, overseas exchange opportunities, and our students are all insured. So for local field trips, it would be no problem. And if you have any, kind of procedural or administrative questions you have, you can always come to us. We'll try our best to resolve the problems. And we want to offer more timely and interdisciplinary courses. For example, we also have ECAS course, data visualization in Area D. Hopefully would equip our students better. And timely courses, of course, I know in Xuyan, we always talk about digital competence, but it's more than that. Digital competence is just one of the things. But I would think all 4 areas are important, such as Chinese culture in the 21st century, cultural differences, in this world where we have to talk about being politically correct, are we sensitive enough or are we too sensitive? So I think all of these are very important things that we have to pay attention to. And so I just want to let you know my take or our take of the General Education Office when it comes to course development. Okay, so it might be different from department, but I hope that this would give you a better idea of what the Restructured GE program is about. So thank you for attending. And if you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer. Thank you. For your case, it would be easier, right? Because you're in Area D, I suppose. I remember the courses that you have. I think you have to, if there are some good ones, I could also let you know. I think maybe some sort of boot camps that they have outside. For example, Preface have some sort of, Python for dummies. Well, they use better names, but like something like that, or Coffee with Python, or, Coding Club. Then you could take your students there, which is in Causeway Bay. And I think sometimes it's free. Sometimes it's free. So for those are also field trips. Or if there's any digital team lab expo that would also, if that's relevant, you can also take them there. It really depends. It depends on how fun you are as a person, But I can try to recommend if there are any relevant ones. But we try to. It really depends on the instructor, because now one of our instructors, she has her own theater group. So for her course, science fiction and moving world, she's taking students to M+ Museum and some of these art fairs. But later she said, oh, this is too expensive. I'm not going to take them there. I might take them to the other one. So I think it's basically what's happening. But if you want extra support, I would pay extra attention to Area D activities. Yeah. Right. But if you want to change that, you could also do that. But I think we have to still go through. So a certain amount of change would not need to go through QAC. But if you are thinking of that, you could contact us and show me how you would like to change it. And then I'll ask QAC whether we need to submit a paper. But it should be a quick fix. And I think right now, my understanding is that they welcome the reduction of the ATs. Yeah. Right. So that's the thing. That's why I said for the TLA, it must be separated from AT. So let's say if you put a field trip as an assessment task, how can you assess whether that person is paying attention? So let's say you're watching a movie theater and the instructor is just staring at all the eyes. Then of course it's not possible, right? Or let's say you are looking at this painting and these two students, they responded. Then you think that, wow, they are engaging. A plus. That too, looking at the picture, not saying anything. B minus. So that's why TLA and AT should be separated. When they are going out there to experience, to look at things, to learn, you might not just use that as an assessment task. The real assessment task may be the thing that when you come back and ask them to write, a commentary or write an actual or produce a product, okay? Or let's say for me, I would think after going to an art fair, come back and write a short poem. Now that is the product. Or you have to think of a task that could help you to evaluate whether they paid attention during that trip. But if you do it on the spot and say that participation is one of them, then it's very difficult. And also we also got that comment. Participation, the external reviewer said, that's basic. You're giving them score to come in and sit down. Like sitting down, it's already participation. Wow. Sometimes I feel the position of teachers are getting lower and lower. Like just coming in would already be a bonus for me. I can't take that. But that's the thing. Field trip would be a TLA, but the product that you want them to produce after that would be the assessment task. Then you can differentiate students and you will not get that complaint because if you are arguing participation. Now, because that is also why you have to use action verb in silos. It has to be measurable, right? So in order to measure that, in order to quantify it, you need to have something that they need to produce. Let's say if you don't want them to write a paper, at least do a panel discussion, okay? Where a few people would say, let's say it's an auction. We went to an art fair. Now there are 5 paintings. Why do you pick this one? Okay, and someone from the government, someone from private sector, etc. Then you could evaluate them. So I think that's a very good question. And the key is, in order to avoid that problem, separate TLAs from ATs.